April 18, 1942, 8:15 a.m., Tokyo's Ginza district. The morning air hangs thick with two distinct scents, the delicate, sweet crispness of cherry blossoms in full bloom and the rich, savory aroma of street food sizzling over open flames. Pink petals drift down like soft confetti, sticking to the polished leather shoes of housewives hurrying to Tsukiji Market, their woven bamboo baskets already half filled with fresh tofu and daikon, and catching on the sharp, pressed uniforms of office workers clutching leather briefcases stamped with their company's gold logos. A group of geisha in vibrant kimonos glides past, their wooden geta clicking against the cobblestones, drawing quick, respectful glances from passers-by. It's a picture of serene normalcy, the kind of morning that makes Tokyo feel untouchable, exactly the illusion Japan's military has spent months cultivating. Down the block, a portly vendor named Takashi flips plump okonomiyaki on a black iron griddle, the sound of sizzling cabbage, marinated pork, and soy sauce mixing with the acrid exhaust of 3 olive-drab military trucks rumbling past. His apron is stained with years of grease, and a rag tucked into his belt is frayed at the edges as he waves it in a half-amused, half-respectful gesture at the truck drivers, their faces stone-hard, eyes forward, no hint of the triumph they're carrying. Those trucks are everywhere these days, rolling through residential neighborhoods and commercial districts alike, a constant, unspoken reminder that Japan's Imperial Army is on an unstoppable roll across the Pacific. Just last week, Takashi's son, stationed in the Philippines, sent a postcard with a photo of himself standing atop a captured American tank, a wide grin on his face. "We're winning," the note read. "The war will be over by summer." Takashi believes it, just like everyone else in Tokyo. A little ways up the street, a group of school kids stands at rigid attention, their navy blue uniforms pressed so sharp they could cut through a sheet of paper. Their backs are straight, hands clasped behind their backs, as they stare up at a giant billboard of Emperor Hirohito, his face serious under the brim of his military cap, gaze steady as if watching over the entire city. Their teacher, Mrs. Tanaka, stands beside them like a soldier herself, spine straight as a rifle, white gloves spotless, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun that hasn't moved all morning. Her voice cuts through the soft clink of a passing rickshaw's brass bells and the distant chatter of shoppers, loud and unwavering, drilling into the children's minds like a drill sergeant's command. "The Imperial Navy is a steel wall around our shores, nothing gets through. No enemy plane will ever darken our skies. No foreign soldier will ever set foot on our sacred land." A young boy in the front row nods so vigorously in agreement that his cap slips over his eyes, obscuring his vision. He scrabbles at it in flustered haste, cheeks flaming crimson with the embarrassment of fumbling in front of his classmates and teacher. Mrs. Tanaka's eyes flick to him, and he freezes, then relaxes when she gives a small, approving nod. Beside him, his older sister, maybe 10 years old, just stares up at the billboard, her eyes wide and shining with pure reverence. She presses a tiny fist to her chest in a silent, instinctive bow. No one told her to do it, it was as natural as breathing, and her lips move in a quick, silent prayer. "Protect His Majesty," she whispers, the words so quiet they're swallowed up by the hum of the street. Like every child in Japan, she's been taught since kindergarten that the emperor is divine, and that Japan's military is his unbreakable shield. 3 blocks away, Rear Admiral Takajiro Onishi sits in his second-floor office, the windows open to let in the cherry blossom-scented breeze as he sips green tea from a chipped porcelain cup, a cherished gift from his late mother, who died when he was stationed in Manchuria. This is the same man who, 3 years later, would dream up Japan's kamikaze suicide attacks, convincing young pilots that dying for the emperor was the highest honor. But right now, in April 1942, he's feeling pretty pleased with himself, a quiet confidence settling over him like a warm blanket. His desk is stacked with thick victory reports, each one a testament to Japan's growing empire, their pages filled with numbers that make his chest swell with pride. Pearl Harbor, 8 battleships sunk. Wake Island, captured, 120 Yanks taken prisoner. Singapore, British surrendered, 80,000 troops, 100,000 tons of supplies. He runs a calloused finger over the Singapore report, the paper still crisp from the printer. His 22-year-old nephew had fought there, and in his last letter, he'd written that the British had surrendered without putting up a real fight. They looked scared, uncle. Like they knew they couldn't win. Just last week, Onishi had sat in a fancy, wood-paneled meeting room at Naval Headquarters with Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant, cigar-chomping head of the Imperial Navy. Yamamoto had leaned back in his leather chair, a cloud of cigar smoke curling around his words, and spoken with the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. The Americans are broken. Their fleet's in pieces. By summer, they'll be begging for peace, their factories can't keep up with us. Onishi nodded then, and he nods again now, the bittersweet taste of green tea lingering on his tongue. In just 120 days, for short months, Japan's army and navy have swept across Southeast Asia like a tropical storm, grabbing 1 million square miles of land and resources. From the lush rice fields of Burma, where peasants now bow to Japanese soldiers instead of British colonial officers, to the oil-rich wells of Indonesia, which now supply a staggering 90% of Japan's fuel needs. The Pacific Ocean isn't just a body of water anymore, it's Japan's private lake, patrolled by Zero fighters and massive battleships with the rising sun emblazoned on their hulls. He takes another slow sip of tea and watches a cluster of cherry petals float past the window. Life is good. Victory is guaranteed. The world is bending to Japan's will, and nothing, no one, can stop it. Then, boom. It's not a distant thud, the kind you might hear from a construction site. It's a sharp, gut-punch crack that shakes the floorboards under Onishi's feet so hard he staggers. The windows rattle violently, their panes vibrating so intensely he's sure they'll shatter into 1,000 tiny shards. His teacup flies out of his hand, arcing through the air before crashing to the floor, green tea splashing across the Singapore victory report, ruining the pristine paper like a stain of shame. Adrenaline surges through his veins, and he stumbles to his feet, his heart hammering so loud he can hear it in his ears. He sprints to the balcony, his polished leather shoes sliding on the wooden floor, and grabs the railing so tight his knuckles turn white. There, glinting in the bright morning sun, are 4 silver planes, low enough that he can see the rivets in their wings and the faint smudges of oil on their fuselages. And painted bold and unmissable on their sides, the white star of the United States. These aren't the sleek, nimble Zero fighters he watches practice over Tokyo Bay every afternoon. Those planes cut through the air like knives, their pilots performing loops and dives to show off their skill. These are big, bulky, blunt-nosed beasts, B-25 Mitchell bombers, he realizes with a jolt of horror, their propellers roaring so loud they drown out the screams of civilians below. He stands frozen for a split second, unable to process what he's seeing, before his military training kicks in. He watches as dark, oblong bundles drop from their bellies, bombs, tumbling straight for the Imperial Army's central warehouse 3 blocks away, a massive concrete structure that stores thousands of rifles and tons of ammunition. The explosion is blinding, a searing ball of orange and black fire that tears the warehouse roof off its steel supports and sends chunks of concrete flying through the air. Smoke billows up in a thick, acrid cloud, smothering the pink cherry blossoms and turning the bright morning sky gray. Takashi the vendor, who just flipped another okonomiyaki, dives under his wooden cart as debris rains down, his griddle crashing to the ground with a clang that echoes over the blast. A woman walking past his stall drops her shopping basket, white rice spilling onto the cobblestones like snow, and stands frozen, her mouth hanging open as she stares up at the American planes disappearing over the horizon. Onishi tears his eyes away from the chaos and grabs the telephone on his desk, his hands shaking so bad he drops the receiver twice before clamping his fingers around it. Who let these planes in? Where are our fighters? Why wasn't there a warning? He yells into the mouthpiece so loud his throat burns, his voice cracking halfway through, something it hasn't done since he was a 19-year-old cadet at the Naval Academy, caught stealing bread from the mess hall to share with a starving classmate. For a man who prides himself on unshakable composure, the display of weakness shames him as much as the enemy planes overhead. This isn't just an attack, it's a humiliation, a direct challenge to Japan's power, right in the heart of its capital. The voice on the other end is panting, like the speaker is running full tilt down the marble corridors of the Air Defense Command. "Admiral, we don't know. They came out of the east, straight over the Pacific. Radar picked up a faint blip an hour ago, but the operator thought it was a flock of seabirds or a fishing fleet. By the time we cross-checked with coastal outposts, they were already over Tokyo Bay. The 1st Air Defense Wing is scrambling now from Yokota Base, but they're 45 minutes away, too late to intercept." The line crackles with static, and Onishi can hear the distant wail of air raid sirens in the background, a sound no one in Tokyo has heard in years. Onishi didn't know it, Yamamoto didn't know it, and the entire Imperial Japanese Military High Command didn't know it. Those 4 planes were just the vanguard of a larger strike. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers total, flown by 80 American airmen who'd spent 6 grueling weeks training for a mission every military expert had labeled impossible. Their leader was James Harold Doolittle, a 45-year-old Army Air Corps colonel with a jagged scar across his left cheek, from a barnstorming crash in 1926 that had broken 3 of his ribs, and a reputation for turning the unthinkable into the accomplished. He'd flown blindfolded to prove the value of instrument navigation, raced planes across the country to set speed records, and now he'd done the unthinkable, launched land-based bombers from the deck of the USS Hornet, an aircraft carrier 650 miles off Japan's coast, a feat that violated every rule of naval aviation. They weren't here to win a battle or destroy Tokyo's war capacity. They were here to shatter a lie, one Mrs. Tanaka had drilled into her students that morning, one Onishi had believed with every fiber of his being, that Japan was untouchable, that its homeland was a sanctuary beyond the reach of enemy hands. The Doolittle raid, as it would later be called, lasted just 15 minutes, 15 minutes of roaring engines, exploding bombs, and panicked screams that would echo through Japan's military hierarchy for months. When the last American plane disappeared over the western horizon, 50 Japanese military targets lay in smoldering ruins, tank factories with their assembly lines melted into twisted metal, naval depots where ammunition crates detonated in chain reactions, and ammunition warehouses reduced to piles of blackened wood and ash. 50 people were dead, most of them military personnel, though a handful of civilians caught in the crossfire added to the horror, and 400 more injured, their wounds ranging from burns to shrapnel gashes. Strategically, it was a pinprick. Japan's vast war machine, fueled by resources from its conquered territories, remained largely intact. But psychologically, it was a sledgehammer to the nation's ego, a blow that shattered the illusion of invincibility. The steel wall of the Imperial Navy had a crack, and everyone in Tokyo, from the emperor in his palace to the street vendor hiding under his cart, could see it. And that crack would widen, 6 months later, on a bug-infested jungle island in the South Pacific called Guadalcanal, where the Pacific War stopped being Japan's unbroken victory march, and became America's gritty, blood-soaked fight back. December 7, 1941, let's rewind 4 months to understand why those 15 minutes of chaos in Tokyo mattered so much, why Doolittle's men risked their lives, and why their mission became a rallying cry for a demoralized America. That morning, the sun rose bright and clear over Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, casting golden light on the rows of American battleships moored in the calm harbor. Sailors went about their morning routines, some sat at mess hall tables eating pancakes and eggs, others polished the massive guns on the battleship's decks, and a few leaned against the railings, joking about the upcoming weekend. No one noticed the 353 Japanese planes speeding toward them, launched from 6 aircraft carriers anchored 230 miles away, their pilots flying low to avoid detection. It was a perfect day for a surprise attack, and Japan had planned every detail down to the minute. At 7:55 a.m., the sky erupted. The first wave of Japanese planes dived toward the harbor, their machine guns blazing and their bombs falling like rain. In just 90 minutes, they turned the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a floating graveyard. The USS Arizona exploded in a catastrophic fireball when a Japanese bomb penetrated its forward ammunition magazine, killing 1,177 sailors in an instant. Their bodies remain entombed in the ship's rusted hull to this day, a permanent memorial to the attack. The USS Oklahoma capsized after being hit by 9 torpedoes, trapping 429 men below deck, most of them drowned before rescuers could cut through the hull to reach them. Sailors jumped into the water to escape the flames, only to be burned by the thick oil that coated the harbor's surface. Some later recalled the water feeling like liquid fire against their skin. By the time the last Zero fighter flew back to its carrier, the damage was staggering. 4 battleships sunk, 18 more ships damaged, and 188 American planes reduced to charred, twisted wreckage on the tarmac. For Japan, it was a perfect victory, a masterstroke of military planning that had been years in the making, designed to cripple America's ability to fight in the Pacific. For America, it was a punch to the gut that left the entire nation reeling in shock and anger. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, his voice tight with emotion, addressed Congress the next day and called it a date which will live in infamy, a phrase that would be etched into the nation's collective memory. But anger alone couldn't sink Japanese ships or shoot down enemy planes. The U.S. Pacific Fleet was in shambles. Its only hope lay in 3 aircraft carriers, the Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, that had been lucky enough to be at sea on training exercises that morning, avoiding the carnage. It was a narrow escape, but one that would prove crucial in the months to come. Japan didn't waste a single minute capitalizing on its victory. By March 1942, just 3 months after Pearl Harbor, they'd captured the Philippines, forcing U.S. General Douglas MacArthur to flee the island of Corregidor, vowing famously, "I shall return," Indonesia, Malaya, and Burma. They now controlled 90% of the world's rubber supply and 75% of its tin, critical resources that fueled their war effort and allowed them to build more planes, ships, and tanks. Their empire stretched 4,000 miles, from the frozen Aleutian Islands off the coast of Alaska to the tropical shores of New Guinea, just a short distance from Australia's doorstep. To many in both nations, it seemed like the Pacific Ocean was Japan's for the taking, and that America would never be able to catch up. In America, morale hit rock bottom, lower than it had been since the darkest days of the Great Depression. Newspapers ran screaming headlines like, "Can we stop Japan?" and "Pacific Fleet on its knees," accompanied by photos of sunken battleships and grieving families clutching telegram notices. Soldiers stationed in the Philippines, trapped and running out of supplies, wrote home in shaky handwriting, "We're outgunned, outmanned, outplanned. The Japanese planes fly over every day, dropping bombs, and we can't even shoot back, our rifles jam, our ammunition is gone." A Marine named Joe Foss, later a Medal of Honor recipient, recalled sitting in a muddy foxhole in the Philippines, eating a half ration of moldy rice, and watching Japanese Zeros loop overhead with impunity. "I thought, is this how it ends? Are we just going to let them take everything we stand for?" he wrote in his memoir. Civilians weren't faring better. In San Francisco, people boarded up their windows and stocked up on canned food, fearing a Japanese invasion was imminent. On the East Coast, parents told their children not to play near harbors or military bases, worried about follow-up attacks. America had never felt so vulnerable, so alone. Roosevelt knew he needed a win, any win, no matter how small. Not just to slow Japan's advance, but to remind Americans they could fight back, that they weren't beaten, that the spirit of the nation was still alive. He called an emergency meeting of his top military advisors in the White House Oval Office, slamming his fist on the desk so hard his glasses slid down his nose. The room was tense, everyone present knew the stakes. The president didn't want excuses, he wanted action. "I want Tokyo bombed. Not in 6 months, now. The American people need to see we can hit back." The problem? It was impossible. No American plane could reach Tokyo and get back. The closest airbase was in China, 1,500 miles away. B-17 bombers had the range but were too big for carriers. Carrier fighters only flew 300 miles, they'd run out of fuel before returning. Admiral Ernest King shook his head. "Mr. President, it can't be done," said Admiral Ernest King, head of the Navy, his face grim with the weight of the decision. "The logistics don't add up. We'd be sending men to their deaths for a symbolic gesture, and that's not what the military is for." The room fell silent, everyone waiting for Roosevelt's response. The president leaned back in his chair, staring at a map of the Pacific pinned to the wall, and smiled faintly, a determined, unyielding smile that told everyone present he wasn't going to back down. "Find a way," he said, his voice low but firm. "I don't care how crazy it sounds, how risky it is, or how many rules you have to break. Find a way to bomb Tokyo. The American people need to see that we're not sitting idle, that we can hit back, and hit hard." Then a Navy captain named Francis Lowe, a logistics expert with a knack for thinking outside the box, had an idea, one he got while watching a training exercise at Naval Air Station Norfolk, Virginia. He'd seen Army B-25 Mitchell bombers practicing short takeoffs, roaring down a runway only 800 feet long before lifting off into the sky. It was something they'd never been designed to do. B-25s were meant for long runways at land bases, but the pilots, young, aggressive, and desperate to contribute to the war effort, were making it work through sheer skill and nerve. Lowe scribbled a note on a napkin that night, the words barely legible in his hurry: B-25s plus carrier equals Tokyo. At the next meeting, he laid out his plan: load B-25 bombers onto an aircraft carrier, sail within striking distance of Japan, launch the bombers from the carrier's deck, and then have the planes fly to China to land at friendly airfields. It was reckless, bordering on insane. B-25s were 67 feet long, weighed 33,000 pounds fully loaded, and normally needed 1,200 feet of runway to take off. A carrier's flight deck was only 800 feet long, less, if you accounted for the superstructure that jutted up from the deck. And if the bombers missed their landing sites in China, or ran out of fuel mid-flight, they'd ditch in the ocean, where the Japanese Navy would almost certainly capture or kill the crew. But it was the only idea anyone had. The military brass called it suicidal. But Roosevelt, desperate for a victory, smiled and said, "Do it." They needed someone crazy enough, skilled enough, and respected enough to lead the mission, someone who could inspire 80 men to risk their lives for a symbolic gesture. That someone was James Doolittle, a former barnstormer who'd once flown upside down over the White House, and gotten a stern warning from the Secret Service for endangering the presidential residence, an air racer who'd set multiple speed records, and an MIT graduate who'd helped invent modern instrument flying. Doolittle was the definition of cool under fire. He'd broken both legs in a crash in 1934 and been back in the cockpit within 3 months, his casts reinforced with metal to withstand the G-forces of flight. When he heard about the Tokyo mission, he walked unannounced into General Henry Hap Arnold's office, the head of the Army Air Corps, and didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "Count me in. I'll lead it." Arnold, who'd known Doolittle for years and respected his courage, hesitated. "Jimmy, you're 45 years old. You're a senior officer, too valuable to risk on a suicide run. We need you here, training new pilots, not flying into Tokyo." He leaned forward, his voice softening. "Think about your family, your wife, your kids. They need you." Doolittle grinned, tapping the scar on his cheek with a calloused finger, a permanent reminder of his willingness to take risks. "Sir, I've been risking my neck for 20 years. This is the best reason yet, for the boys who died at Pearl Harbor, for the ones trapped in the Philippines. If I ask my men to fly into danger, I need to lead them. That's how this works." Arnold sighed, knowing he'd lost the argument. Doolittle had that effect on people. Once he set his mind to something, nothing could stop him. The mission had its leader. Doolittle hand-picked 80 airmen, all volunteers, all men who'd either lost friends at Pearl Harbor or had watched Japan's conquests with growing rage. He didn't sugarcoat the danger during the briefing at a secret training camp in Florida, gathering the men in a hangar with a map of the Pacific pinned to the wall. He wanted them to understand exactly what they were signing up for: no illusions, no lies. "This mission is one way for the planes," he told them, his voice clear and steady. "You'll launch from a carrier, bomb Tokyo, and then fly to China. But the odds are against you, fuel will be tight, the Japanese will be looking for you, and if you crash, you'll be behind enemy lines. You might not come back. But if we succeed, we'll wake up America. We'll show them that we're not beaten, that we're still in this fight." And we'll wake up Japan, show them that their homeland isn't safe, that no place is beyond our reach. He paused, scanning the faces of the men in front of him. If any of you want to back out, no one will blame you. This is your last chance. Not a single man moved. No one backed out. One gunner, Sergeant David Thatcher, later said, after Pearl Harbor, I'd have flown to hell and back for a chance to hit Japan. This was better, it was hitting them where it hurt, in their backyard, where they thought they were safe. Another pilot, Lieutenant Ted Lawson, wrote in his diary the night before deployment, "My wife cried when I told her I was volunteering. She hugged me tight and said, 'Go. Make them pay for what they did to our boys at Pearl Harbor. That's all I need to know. I'm ready.'" These weren't just soldiers, they were fathers, brothers, husbands, college kids who'd left their studies to enlist. All willing to risk everything for their country and for the memory of those who'd fallen. The B-25s were stripped down to the bare essentials to save weight. Ground crews worked 18-hour days, tearing out every non-essential part with wrenches and crowbars. They removed the rear gun turret, replacing it with a broomstick painted black to look like a machine gun, a clever ruse to fool Japanese fighters into thinking the plane was armed, took out extra seats to make room for more fuel, and welded 16 additional fuel tanks into the bomb bays and cargo holds. The pilots practiced short takeoffs on a dummy carrier deck built on a Florida airfield, using painted lines to simulate the Hornet's flight deck and superstructure. They crashed more than once. One plane nosed into the ground during a practice run, injuring 3 men, but they kept practicing, their skills improving with every attempt. After 30 days of 12-hour training days, only 16 crews were deemed good enough to make the mission. They were the best of the best, and they knew it. On April 2, 1942, the USS Hornet, its flight deck loaded with 16 B-25s, their wings folded to save space, sailed silently from San Francisco, its crew. April 17, 1942, 300 miles off Japan. The ocean was calm, but the mood on the Hornet was tight. Then a lookout yelled, "Japanese fishing boat, 5 miles out." It was the Nipmaru, and before the Navy could sink it, they radioed Tokyo, "Enemy carrier spotted." Doolittle's blood ran cold. They were supposed to launch 500 miles out, giving planes enough fuel for China. Now, they had 2 choices, abort, or launch early, 650 miles from Tokyo, knowing fuel would be tight. "Launch now," he said. "We don't have a choice." April 18, 8:20 a.m. Doolittle climbed into his B-25, the Tokyo Express. His co-pilot, 26-year-old Richard Cole, gave a thumbs up, "Let's make history." Doolittle gunned the engines, the plane shook so hard Cole's teeth rattled. It rumbled down the deck, so low Cole could see fish leaping. Then it lifted off, roaring past the Hornet's tower. The crew cheered, crying. One by one, the other 15 planes followed. By 9 a.m., all were airborne. The carriers turned tail for Hawaii, they'd be sitting ducks if they stayed. The B-25s flew 50 feet above the ocean, avoiding radar. When they passed Japanese fishing boats, they waved, pretending to be Japanese pilots. It worked. By noon, they crossed Japan's coast, flying over rice fields where farmers dropped their tools, staring. Doolittle looked down at Tokyo, the Imperial Palace's golden roof, Yokohama's docks, Mitsubishi's tank factory. "Let's give them hell," he yelled to Cole. Bombs fell. The arsenal blew up, smoke rising 1,000 feet. The tank factory became a fireball. A naval airfield lost 3 Zeros. The Japanese were caught off guard, sirens wailed, but no fighters came. Civilians ran. Hideko Suzuki, a 28-year-old housewife, wrote later. "I saw the silver planes and thought, they can't be American. Then the bombs hit. My neighbor's house collapsed. I grabbed my baby and ran to the basement, covering her with my body. I prayed so hard my hands cramped." By 8:30 a.m., all planes were heading west for China. None made it to their landing sites, fuel ran out, a storm hit. Doolittle bailed out, breaking his ankle. Cole landed in a rice paddy, covered in mud. 3 men died in crashes. 8 were captured by Japan, 5 executed, 3 starved in POW camps. But 69 survived, thanks to Chinese villagers who hid them, even though Japan threatened death for anyone caught helping Americans. April 20, 1942, America heard the news. Headlines screamed, "Doolittle bombs Tokyo." Roosevelt joked the planes took off from Shangri-La, a make-believe paradise. Morale exploded. A Detroit factory worker said, "I worked 2 extra shifts. If those guys can fly to Tokyo, I can build more tanks." Japan. Fury. Emperor Hirohito yelled at Yamamoto for 30 minutes, something he'd never done before. "How could Americans bomb our capital? You said our navy was invincible." Yamamoto bowed his head, "I am sorry. I will make them pay." He ordered a retaliation, capture Midway Atoll, 1,300 miles from Hawaii. If Japan took Midway, they could attack Hawaii and end the war. What he didn't know. America had cracked Japan's secret code, JN-25. They knew exactly when and where Japan would strike. June 4, 1942, the Battle of Midway. America sank 4 Japanese carriers. Japan lost 3,057 men, 250 planes. America lost 307 men, 147 planes. It was a turning point. But Japan wasn't done. The next fight would be on a tiny island no one had heard of, Guadalcanal. August 1942, Guadalcanal, part of the Solomon Islands, 1,000 miles from Australia. 90 miles long, 30 miles wide, covered in thick jungle. 90 degrees every day, 150 inches of rain a year. Malaria mosquitoes, crocodiles, poisonous snakes. Black sand beaches, murky water. Before the war, just a few hundred villagers and missionaries lived there. So why did 60,000 men fight and die there? An airstrip. Australian spies reported Japan was building one on Guadalcanal's north coast. If finished, Japanese planes could sink U.S. supply ships to Australia, cut off the country, and invade. America couldn't let that happen. Admiral King ordered an invasion, Operation Watchtower. 19,000 Marines, most raw recruits, never in combat, would land, take the airstrip, hold it. Private John Basilone, 25 from New Jersey, said, "We got mosquito nets, rifles, and a wrong map. It showed rivers where there were mountains. We knew we were in trouble." August 7, 1942, 75 U.S. ships dropped anchor. Marines climbed into landing craft and hit the beach. The Japanese fled into the jungle. By noon, they had the airstrip. They named it Henderson Field, after a pilot who died at Midway. They thought the hard part was over. They were wrong. Japan reacted with rage. Yamamoto sent 10,000 soldiers and a naval force, 2 battleships, 5 cruisers, 14 destroyers, to retake the island and sink U.S. supply ships. August 8, 1942, 10 p.m. Japanese Admiral Mikawa's fleet slipped into Iron Bottom Sound, between Guadalcanal and Tulagi. Most U.S. sailors were asleep. America's night radar didn't work, and lookouts missed the Japanese until it was too late. Mikawa's ships opened fire. The USS Astoria took 15 hits, sank in 30 minutes, 219 dead. The USS Quincy capsized after a torpedo, 370 dead. The USS Vincennes went down with 332 men. The Australian cruiser Canberra was so damaged America had to sink it, 84 dead. 38 minutes. America lost 4 cruisers, 1,077 sailors. Japan lost nothing. It was the worst naval defeat since Pearl Harbor. Mikawa could have sunk the supply ships, stranding the Marines, but he feared U.S. carriers and fled. A mistake that saved the Marines. The next morning, a supply ship captain rowed ashore, "The Navy's gone. You're on your own." The Marines had 10 days of food, 50 rounds per man. Basilone said, "We dug foxholes and waited. At night, we heard Japanese in the jungle, shouting, firing. We didn't sleep. We just held our guns." August 21, 1942, 3 a.m. Colonel Kiyono Ichiki's 2,000 Japanese soldiers attacked the Marine line along the Tenaru River. Ichiki, a veteran of Nanjing, told his men, "Americans are cowards. They'll run." They charged, yelling, "Banzai." Marines opened fire. The river turned red. Ichiki's men kept coming, some with bayonets, some with sticks. Basilone manned a .30 caliber machine gun, firing for 4 hours, hands blistering. When it jammed, he grabbed a rifle. Out of ammo, he fought with a knife. Dawn came. 800 Japanese dead, including Ichiki, who killed himself. Marines lost 35. Basilone got the Medal of Honor. But 6,000 more Japanese soldiers were on their way, led by General Hyakutake, capture Henderson Field by September 15. Or die. September 12, 1942, midnight. 3,000 Japanese attacked a narrow ridge south of Henderson Field, defended by 840 Marines led by Colonel Red Mike Edson. The ridge was covered in tall grass and palms. Marines dug in. Japanese charged in waves, climbing over their dead. Hand-to-hand fights, bayonets, knives, rocks. Edson got shot in the chest but kept yelling, "Hold the line." At one point, 20 wounded Marines counterattacked, driving the Japanese back. Private Henry Girk, shot in the neck, kept throwing grenades until he died, posthumous Medal of Honor. 3 days later, 1,200 Japanese dead, 130 Marines dead. The ridge got renamed Bloody Ridge. Edson said, "They didn't fight for glory. They fought for each other." Life on Guadalcanal was worse than the fighting. Marines lived on sea rations, canned monkey meat, crackers, chocolate. By September, half-rations. Basilone said, "I dreamed of pizza. A supply plane dropped oranges once, we fought over them like dogs. Malaria was everywhere. No quinine for 2 months. 80% of Marines got sick, high fevers, shakes, vomiting. One Marine talked to a coconut, thinking it was his mom. The jungle was an enemy. Snakes slithered into foxholes. Crocodiles attacked in rivers. Rain soaked everything, turning ground to mud. Marines slept in water-filled holes, boots rotting off their feet. Japan had it worse. They called it Starvation Island. Supply ships came at night, Tokyo Express, but dropped little. Soldiers ate grass, bark, rats, even cannibalized the dead. Takeo Kawamura wrote in his diary, "I ate a lizard today. It tasted like chicken. I'm so hungry I'd eat anything." 90% had malaria or dysentery, no medicine. Wounded died in the jungle. Kawamura, "A man next to me lost his leg. He cried for water all night. Morning, he was dead. I buried him with a stick." November 12 to 15, 1942, the climax. Japan sent 11 ships with 10,000 soldiers and supplies, escorted by 2 battleships. Plan: bomb Henderson Field, land troops, retake the airfield. America's plan: stop them. Outgunned, but with radar and surprise. November 12, 10 p.m. Japanese battleships Hai and Kurashima bomb Henderson Field, 42 U.S. planes destroyed, 41 Marines dead. America fought back. USS San Francisco hit Hai 15 times, disabling it. Next day, U.S. planes sank it. November 14, midnight. Kurashima returned, hit USS South Dakota 42 times, it didn't sink. USS Washington, with radar, spotted Kurashima in the dark, fired 75 shells, 19 hits. Hiroshima sank in 30 minutes, 280 dead. November 15, dawn. U.S. planes and ships attacked the supply convoy, 7 ships sunk. Only 2,000 soldiers and 200 tons of supplies made it ashore. Japan couldn't send more convoys. Their troops were stranded. December 1942, Japan's fate was sealed. 20,000 soldiers on Guadalcanal, only 8,000 fit to fight. No food, no ammo. Henderson Field was fully operational, U.S. planes bombed daily. America had 50,000 troops, fresh supplies. Yamamoto had to choose, send more men, and lose them, or retreat. On January 4, 1943, he ordered withdrawal. By February 9, all Japanese soldiers were gone. Guadalcanal was America's. The cost? Let's not just rattle off numbers, let's feel them. 7,100 Americans dead, that's sons from Iowa farms, husbands from New York City tenements, kids who'd never fired a gun before Guadalcanal's mud. 19,200 more came home with shrapnel scars, malaria shakes, or memories of jungle nights where the only sounds were crocodiles and enemy shouts. For Japan, 25,000 men, most not killed by bullets, but by the hunger, disease, and despair we heard about from Takeo Kawamura. Men who ate lizards, buried their friends with sticks, and died knowing their invincible empire was cracking. But here's the thing, those losses weren't just casualties. They were the sound of the tide turning, slow, brutal, but unshakable. It all started with 80 men in 16 B-25s, flying 650 miles into the lion's den. Doolittle's 15-minute raid didn't destroy Tokyo's factories, but it destroyed Japan's myth of invincibility. It made Emperor Hirohito yell at Yamamoto. It made Yamamoto rush into the Battle of Midway, blind with rage, right into America's code-breaking trap. And when Midway's smoke cleared, for Japanese carriers at the bottom of the Pacific, America finally had the chance to strike back. That strike? Guadalcanal. This wasn't just holding an island. It was 19,000 raw Marines, stuck with wrong maps and half-rations, fighting off banzai charges with knives when ammo ran out. It was John Basilone's blistered hands on a machine gun, Henry Girk throwing grenades until his last breath, and Chinese villagers hiding downed airmen even when the Japanese threatened death. America wasn't just fighting back anymore, we were digging in, and we were winning. The Pacific War would drag on for 3 more brutal years, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, the atomic bombs. But Japan's best days? They ended on that black sand beach in Guadalcanal. All because 80 men dared to fly into Tokyo's skies, and 60,000 men dared to hold a jungle no one had heard of. This is the story of how ordinary guys, farmers, mechanics, kids fresh out of high school, became the ones who turned World War II around. Not with grand speeches, but with courage when every odds said they'd fail.